All right, everyone. I'm excited to have a guest today. This is our first virtual version of this, and I want to introduce my friend James Lee. James Lee is the co-founder and CEO of Bella Groves, and this is a membership-based dementia care and training organization based in San Antonio, Texas. And James has served the senior living industry for 13 years and counting. He started his career as a caregiver and has held 6 community roles, including resident programming and multiple director or executive director roles. James has also served in numerous senior and national level roles in sales, operations, and learning and development for well respected organizations. And he is a trusted advisor, speaker, and thought leader in the senior living profession. As co founder and CEO of Bella Groves, he leads the organization in setting a bold vision to change how families in Central Texas affected by dementia are supported through a foundation of education. They are beginning with the opening of a 32-bed dementia care residence in North San Antonio as the hub of services, which include dementia training, care coordination services, and other learning products aimed at helping families to better care for their loved ones at home. And at Bella Groves, they believe that dementia care and support isn't just a place, it is a service. So thank you, James, for making time.
Hey, thanks for having me on, BJ. I'm glad we're having another conversation. This time we're just recording it and sharing it.
Yep, James. Where we met, we were. I was a speaker, and he was the keynote at a conference on a similar topic, and we just ran into each other at breakfast and kicked up a
Yeah.
conversation. And I said, I have the way you're talking, particularly in the field of senior care, dementia care, and what you're talking about was refreshing to me. It
Yeah.
seemed like we had some similar ideas in terms of how things are going, but you are wearing that hat and leading an organization. I said, I think I have some people that would love to hear from you. And here we
I
find ourselves.
appreciate that, man. And I almost missed my flight because I was so interested in our conversation. And I think at one point, both of us were like, we just have to stop and walk away. And I did almost miss my flight, but I'm glad we got to sit and talk together.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you didn't miss your flight on my behalf. Well, I want to start with a kind of a deep question that we can spring off of. And
Yeah.
something that was on your website that was really prevalent for you is the term unconditional joy. So, in your words,
Hmm.
James, as a leader, what is unconditional joy?
That is a really deep question to start on, but I think it's the right one. So, technically, what it is, unconditional joy, is the tagline to our company, Bella Groves. And I think the best way to explain this is that through my 13, now 15 years in the senior living industry, I've seen a lot of great and I've seen a lot of things that need to change about the way that we serve our customers, and it's especially apparent to me in the realm of dementia care. And I think that there is this unspoken belief about people living with dementia that there's not a lot that they can do, so just take care of them as best you can. Make sure they take showers and get their meds and are safe and not wandering. And there's this kind of safeguarding of people living with dementia that is the de facto way that our industry regards them. We don't say those things, but that's how the care plans are developed. That's how staffing ratios are developed. It's about seeing people for the things that they can no longer do.
Mm.
And that's why there's so much focus on care. If you talk to most senior living companies and you ask them, executives especially, and you say, hey, what's the most important thing that your company does? And they'll probably tell you care. The most important thing we do is care. But I've started to have this belief that in the pursuit of doing something good, a lot of people inadvertently do harm. And I
Mm.
think in the pursuit of providing care, we have inadvertently created a lot of harm, and we have disabled people living with dementia even further by
Mm.
thinking about the things that they can no longer do. And something as simple and as positively motivated as saying we care uh, gets us on the wrong path. Which brings us to Bella Groves. We don't say that care is the most important thing we do. Care is a part of what we do, but the most important thing we do for people living with dementia is that we see them past their diagnosis. We see their families past their role as caregiver. And we see the person living with dementia as a whole human being,
Mm,
a complete human being. And and we thought, what greater north star for us, for what we're trying to do together, than to say that no matter what happens in this process of dementia, which is difficult, which is gut wrenching at times, which is tragic and grief stricken at times. Yes, it is all of those things, but it does not mean that the person underneath is no longer there. The person underneath is still capable of and deserves the best things in life, not the least of which is joy, joyful
mm.
experiences. So, unconditional joy is our promise. It is an anchor. It is our North Star that says, no matter what happens to you in your journey, whether as the person with dementia or as a care partner helping them, um, joy is unconditional. So, that is our pursuit. That's our calling card.
Excellent. And can you give an example of maybe what some folks have experienced prior to Bella Groves
Mhm.
versus what they've experienced there that would be kind of the epitome of joy versus care?
Yeah. There's this specific gentleman I think of when you ask me that question, and we'll call him John. Well, a generic name here. We'll just say John. So John moved, not his real name. John moved into our community a few months back, and I visited John at another care facility. It's a memory care facility, and right when I walked in for the assessment, they knew I was coming. They knew I was from another care facility. I walked in. I said, "Hey, I'm James. I'm here to see John." And the caregiver, who was very nice about it. There was no ill intent, but it was very indicative of the mindset that is trained in our field's caregivers. She said, "Oh, you're here to see John. I hope he does better, at your place. But he's right over there. He's laying on the ground. He tends to do that a lot. John is, very nice, but he's got kind of the brain or the mind of a 5 year old. So, you're going to have to really speak slowly. You're going to have to be kind of a little bit firm with him. Otherwise, he won't really understand what you're saying. But, he wanders a lot, but he is redirectable at times, but he gets really agitated. And this is all of the stuff that was just coming out from this caregiver whom I've never met. But that, again, it didn't come out of a place of malice. She was actually trying to pass along helpful information to me. But when you hear that profile, you don't know anything about John other than the outward perceptions about his challenges. So you know his behavioral expressions, as we call them, related to dementia. Yeah, he did lay on the floor. He moved furniture around. He paced. He walked to the door. He was what our industry traditionally calls exit seeking. He was agitated. He was all of those labels that our industry typically places on people. He was under the care of hospice, and essentially the people around him there said, John, it's at this point it's mostly about just keeping him calm, not agitated, and keeping him safe, giving him care. Right, that was the focus. Since moving into our community, uh, well, let me give a specific instance of this. So, John, when he moved to our community, disoriented a little bit, obviously, because he's in a new environment. And the first day he was there, he laid down on the floor as he had been doing. And in his previous environment, the way that they would have reacted to John would have been, "Hey, John, get up off the floor. I can take you to your bed." Hey, John, the floor is dirty. Hey, John, somebody's walking. And basically, it's trying to make him feel like that's a weird behavior. But in his mind, even if you don't know a lot about dementia, BJ, does John think that his laying on the floor is odd? Probably not, right? In his mind, that's not an odd thing. So he wouldn't do it otherwise. And so when we saw him lay down on the floor at Bella Groves, what we did was we sat down next to him. I didn't lay all the way down. My knees aren't as good as they used to be. But I sat down, I got to his level. I didn't try to correct or change it. I just said, I forgot exactly what I said, but it's probably along the lines of, "Hey, John, what are we doing down here?" And he kind of looked around, and he said, "Oh, this is hard." I said, "Do you want a pillow?" He's like, "No, no pillow." I said, "Okay," and I just sat there with him. I didn't try to change what he was doing.
Mm.
I was just with him, and he himself was like, "Yeah, I need to get up," and he got up and he moved on. 2 or 3 days after he moved in with us, we have not seen that laying down on the floor behavior since. It's been
Wow.
3 months, and it hasn't shown up again. He is no longer that exit seeking person. There are times that it happens, but the times that it happens, we're not trying to redirect him away from the door. We're not trying to say, "Hey, John, don't go there. Let's go over here." Most of the time, our caregivers, because they're taught to do this, will open the door, go out with him, and say, "Hey, John, how can I help you?" Right?
Mm.
And in most cases, he'll say, "Well, I'm looking for my wife." And so we don't say, "Oh, your wife is somewhere and she'll come back, later," because that's a therapeutic lie, as it's called in our industry. We just stick with his story. We stay in his reality because we are helpful to whatever he needs to
Mm.
accomplish. We're not trying to pull him to what we think is normal. So we'll say, "Oh, yeah, John, where did you last see her?" And he fills in the narrative. And so we may go around, we may look for her car, we may, walk halfway down the street, and then almost every single time he's the one who's like, "It's hot out here," or "Let's go back inside," or she'll probably be back later. And he calms himself down because we are there to assist him with whatever purpose he has at that moment. So that's the difference to me, BJ, of when people are focused on care, they think about safety and keeping away from harm and don't have them laying on the floor. But when you think about somebody as a whole person, laying down on the floor is not odd behavior to him, so it's not odd behavior to me.
Mm.
Going to the door is not exit seeking. It's simply he's got some unmet need, and we just have to help figure out what that is and how to help him meet that need.
Wow.
And so, getting to the unconditional joy part, because we believe in his capabilities and not just look at his disabilities. The other day, John and his wife went on an outing with us, and it was a woodworking place. So they create these beautiful pieces of wood furniture, and they do woodworking there. And so John, who 3 months ago was at a facility that basically thought of him as on death's door and just watch him until he passes away. Just 3 months later, in our environment, he's out back in the community, working with power tools with somebody obviously assisting and being there with him. But he had a great time, and his wife had a great time. And the thing that I'll end with here on that story, um, she said to us, she said, "James, you gave me John back,"
Mm.
and I can't think of a more impactful statement for a family to give us than that feeling of you gave me my husband back.
Wow.
And you don't get there because care is the most important thing you do. You get there because the seeing somebody as a whole human being is the most important thing we do. And so, yeah, he's got a new lease on life. He still has challenging moments and days, um, but I think he's a really good example of that difference between
Mm.
care orientation and person orientation.
Well, you've said some pretty profound things there that struck me. And one of the pieces of like the how to create that unconditional joy is you saw him first. You
Hmm.
started in his world. You went in that instance and met him where he was at. Versus
Yeah.
maybe a lot of folks listening, it's easy to do the diagnosis. It's easy to do the therapeutic lies even in leadership,
Hmm.
like when you're getting manager training or leadership training,
Oh
it's
man.
like a lot of that terminology is interesting. I'm like, wow, that's what we should call it. Like it's this
Hmm.
kind of like fugazi, inauthentic like thing. I'm at work doing a work thing now. I'm going to
Yeah.
do this, like inflict myself on this person by
Yeah.
saying blah, 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 blah. Again, best intentions, right? When you're doing it. But
Hmm.
what isn't surprising to me is the response that
Yeah.
John, in that case, quote unquote, gave you when you met him there first and gave him some agency over
Totally.
his situation. And I guess parlaying that over, I mean, you've grown up. I mean, just reading your bio, grown up
Hmm.
through this in this world. You've kind of seen how not tos. You've brought a lot of how tos to Bella Groves. You just gave us an example of that. So I guess a question I have, and I'd love to parlay this to some leadership guidance and inputs for folks that do work in senior care and healthcare. At what point did you kind of realize in your journey that you were a leader?
Oh yeah. You know, lots of hard hitting, deep, questions here, BJ. This is like campfire conversation stuff.
I'll get the
Which
s'mores.
maybe next time we will actually do that. When did I realize I was a leader? I think without faking humility, because a lot of people do that. Oh, I'm not a leader and I don't think of myself that way. In a lot of ways I think that's an inauthentic response. I do consider myself a leader, um, but not a perfect leader. I consider myself learning and growing. I think all of those things are true. But I do consider myself a leader, and I think there probably wasn't like one specific inflection moment, but I can tell you the transition I had that helped me adopt what I now know is a leadership mindset versus before, which is more of a traditional people manager, I would say, mindset. I was put into a lot of management roles without any leadership training, and I think
Hmm.
most people are. So you're asked to do leadership tasks, but you're given a manager's job description. Make sure they do all of their time cards, make sure they do XYZ, and it's this checklist of things that you're supposed to monitor employees doing essentially. And so all of the leadership things that you're supposed to be doing are kind of framed in that context of you're like, that's where the carrots and sticks comes from.
Mm-hmm.
The story that I have that really emphasizes how I did not have a leadership mindset in my first couple of management roles. There was a young lady who was an assistant activities person when I was the activities director, and we were having her annual performance review. And I prepped.
Everyone's favorite time.
Oh, everyone's favorite time, right? Yeah, you're once a year. Here's how you did all year long. But for me, it was my first one as a manager, so I took it seriously. I prepared for it. I put a lot of thought into it, and we had this meeting, and I was excited. I was excited going into that meeting, and it was about an hour long. We were together, and by the end of it, I thought I had provided so many like empathetic and like all about her points. And I was like, hey, this is what, if you work on this, you can do that. And, you can grow your career this way. Maybe, this time, 1 year from now, you're in this job and I'm in a different job. And I sat through all of that feeling really proud of myself. And then I could tell she was kind of thinking, and she had that look about her that was like, um, when you give somebody a gift and they have to kind of like fake appreciate it. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, can you tell me what's on your mind? And she said, I can tell you put a lot of effort into this, and I really don't mean to sound unappreciative, but I don't want your job. And she said, I really like my job now. I really enjoy my job. I want to get more out of it. And I want to be better at what I do now, but that's really not my career story. And and it struck me that all of this time and effort that I put into this was not about her. It was all about me showing her what a brilliant manager I was. And so I had
Mm.
all of these things written out for her. And I realized the entire time I hadn't asked her, what do you want out of this time? What do you want from me to help you with the things that you feel are important? How do you feel connected to this job? What are the things that you dread about this job? How can I help you get more out of it? And that should have been how I approached it. I know that now, but I certainly didn't know it then. So to answer your question about when did I realize I was a leader, was when I started to take responsibility that that a leader's only real purpose in a workplace function is to help the people that they're leading to be successful in their vision of what success looks like,
Mm.
and that's it, you know. And so if you approach situations where you are helping the other person to feel success in their vision of what success is, you know, the information you have at the organizational level, um, to it's really to bridge the gap between that employee's understanding of what the company needs and what they're motivated to do anyway. And your job as a manager or leader is you have access to information or big picture to help them kind of, um, I guess, calibrate their approach, right? It's not to change their job or any, or it's not just about strengths and weaknesses. It's you can see a little bit further out in the journey, right? You're a little bit higher vantage point. So I can see a little bit further ahead. I know that you want to get there. Let me give you a heads up that you've got some hurdles coming up. And so let's talk about how you might tackle that and how I can support you. That's a leadership mindset versus just barking orders down and saying, hey, the company's moving in that direction, so I need you to
Hmm.
do X, Y, and Z. That's a really managerial, task driven approach to look at it. But I think I recognize the responsibility of leadership, and that's what's helped me to um, take take ownership of that term, of what it means to be a leader.
So once you learn that, what'd you do to fill the gap? You're like, wow, I'm doing this wrong. There's
Hmm.
another way to do it. I don't think that's just a mindset shift. I think there's actually like a skills
Yeah,
learning and practice
totally.
kind of journey that you probably went on. What did that look like?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is the next natural step. So there's an upskilling that happens. I started a podcast not too long ago called Level Up, and that's the whole premise of the entire podcast. Is like, the point of leadership is to be introduced to new ways of thinking, but at the end of the day, you are responsible for leveling up. You know, just because you know you want to get fit doesn't mean, oh, now I'm fit. You have to learn, how do I exercise? How do I eat? How do I change my sleeping habits? How do I change my drinking and hydration habits? You got to learn all that stuff. So for me, I know one of my most effective means of getting new information is reading. So I love to read books on leadership, self improvement, self help, all of the things about how to improve yourself as a human being are actually all of the things you need to learn to be a good leader.
Hmm.
So if you are pretty crappy at conversations and listening, well, you're going to be bad at leadership too. If you are bad at emotional responsiveness or reactions and you don't really know how to label your feelings and express your feelings, you're also going to be a terrible leader. So if I were able to turn my computer without messing everything up here, what you would see is bookshelves full of self help leadership books, and I think anything aimed at helping you find introspection and then and change your approach is a really great place to start. So books is one of them, and I think, you know, it may feel like a cop out answer to talk about mentors. I don't have one Yoda. You know, I don't have like one mentor who just kind of guides me from the mountaintop. What I do have is a specific intent to have meaningful conversations with people who care about me and I care about them. And then through that, honestly, like the conversation you and I had, BJ,
Hmm.
in the lobby at breakfast, that to me is leadership training. That's me sharpening my axe with somebody else on that journey. So I think it's acquiring new information. I am solely responsible for bringing new information to the table, but then I have to socialize that new knowledge with other people who are on that same path or have gone further down that leadership path. So I think it's a mixture of the two for me. And I've had other, you know, formal means education, school, master's program, things like that. But at the end of the day, those are kind of, I'd say those are like satellite things around the core, gravity, which is self-sourcing learning materials related to what you want to do, and then socializing that new knowledge with people that you trust.
I just think like in what you're sharing, some of it to learn in what you just shared requires a sense of, first of all, self motivation, but
Yeah.
also a sense of profound humility. Because someone wired like you're wired to make change, you're wired to innovate, you're already wired to do a lot of those things, which I want to talk about again in a second. Because when I say healthcare and senior care and innovation, they're almost like oxymorons, and we're going to
Hmm.
talk about
Hmm.
that in a little bit. But I guess how did you how do you, I guess how do you or how did you kind of process that gap when you finally realize
Hmm.
I know what's going on, I'm leading, I'm doing well. It's like you don't know anything, or
Hmm.
your knowledge right now based on like some realization is so insufficient that
Yeah.
you have to start this journey. I feel like there's a lot of folks that I work with,
Hmm.
they'll have that moment and then they'll do some optical thing that makes it look
Yeah.
like, oh, I filled the gap. I got like a little certification or I got this thing. But like the new, I guess it just doesn't become, they don't become fit that way that you just shared that story. It doesn't become embodied. It's part of their game now.
Yeah.
So I guess what happened in you, or how has that grown in you, or even from like childhood? Have you just been a person who's just been like curious like that, and you could just kind of take those lumps and develop from them, or did
Mm.
you develop that and realize like, I don't like feeling like this, but I'm gonna take it and do something with it? I mean, or something in between.
Yeah. Um, I think this is a little bit of like trying to, like if you eat something that is amazing and you're trying to figure out, well, how did this meal come together? It'd be really hard to extrapolate all of the different ways that happened. But I can probably tell you there's some key ingredients of what I just shared with you. Um, you know, I think that there are people who are very self aware. In fact, I would tell you most people are self aware. It's that most people don't know what to do with that self awareness. And some people take that self awareness of, hey, you know what? I get this reaction a lot. I sit down with people and people think I'm very egotistical, but hey, that's just kind of who I am. That's how I'm wired. And I just gotta live with myself. Play to my strengths. I think that kind of self-talk, it's helpful to a small degree, but it is hurtful when you adopt that as kind of that shield of, I don't need to listen to feedback. The thing for me that helped me to internalize the need for change and then to start putting action towards it um, is it, I'm, I don't know all of the components around it, but I know the virtue of selfishness. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase before, but
No, but
that
it sounds like something I can really hang on to.
yeah. Well, the virtue of selfishness, when you think about, and I think it's like a philosopher, Ayn Rand, maybe, that, the concept of selfishness as a virtue, when you eliminate all of the negative connotations of the word selfishness, and you think of it more as, are you, we are all self-interested because we are human beings. We are all interested in our own self-preservation, self-growth, all of those things. But I think rather than ignore that or try to hide it, it's like the metaphor of like the beast in the basement, your ego or whatever metaphor to fit that. You're not trying to get rid of the beast. You can't. The beast is there. It's part of you. It's part of your house. But keep it in the basement, not in your main house. Address it, acknowledge it, but don't let that beast become, everything about you. So ego, I think, is something we all struggle with. But for me, what I recognized was that I was starting to have consistent responses around me, both in my close circle of friends, my personal relationships, and at work. That there was this feeling starting to happen of like, I like James, but he always makes me feel like he's better than me. or he always makes me feel like he's kind of talking down to me. And thank God there were enough people with courage to speak up, and people who loved me enough to kind of let me know that. But when you start looking at patterns and responses to you as just data, and you try to eliminate that emotion around the data, and you're just saying, okay, consistently enough, I'm getting these data points about me. That's something about my manners, my behaviors, my language, my approach is causing people to feel like I am trying to create this separation. And it was somebody at work one time that I was working with, and she said, I believe everything that you're coaching me to do, but I just feel bad about myself
Mm.
when I talk to you. And I was like, and how can you be bad? How can I be mad in that moment when she said it so sincerely and she didn't mean it for harm? She said, I believe everything you have to say. I believe all of the things that I need to improve about these things that we talked about, but I feel bad about myself when you tell me that. And it
That's
was,
hard. That's even hard to hear sitting in your seat because you're like,
it, it
oof.
it's excruciatingly hard because I also had to self-examine in that moment, BJ. Well, what is my intent here? My intent is to help her. My intent is to do my job, but also my intent is to help her. But where is that ego starting to take the driver's seat here? That's creating that separation. And so, um, how it started to kind of click for me, and going back to the virtue of selfishness, when I realized, you know what, I'm going to have bad relationships. I'm going to have bad friendships. I'm going to have bad workplace relationships if I don't change this about me. So, in the interest of myself and in the interest of my own career and relationships, all the good things that I want in my life, I have to take these data points. I have to just accept them as truth. I have to figure out how to change my habits so that this effect doesn't happen anymore. And so that's what I mean about if you are looking at self improvement is, technically selfish because you're improving yourself. But I actually think that it is the most important thing you can do for the people you love in your life is that you are so dedicated to self improvement that if every time I level up in my relationship management skills and my self health, mental health regimen, all of those things to improve myself, make me a better husband, father, friend, colleague, leader. So I think some of it was just growing, maturing, but a lot of it was just paying attention to people giving consistent feedback and saying there's got to be something to it. And here's the thing: once you start making that mental shift, um, it's easy. Like if we were having a conversation right now, and you said something really critical to me, and you said, "Whatever, James, you talk too much. You haven't let me talk at all during this conversation." I could respond poorly to that, right? It is human instinct to have a defense to it, but the most disarming thing I can do is to say, thanks for sharing that with me. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're feeling there? And to do it with sincerity, and it's a disarming thing to say, oh wait, I just said something, and I'm preparing to kind of, verbally and mentally fight you on this. But when the other person doesn't put their hands up, metaphorically
Mm.
speaking, and they put their hands down, they open up to you. They say, I'm sorry, man, that's a blind spot of mine. I've actually been given that feedback before. Um, would you help me out here a little bit? Tell me a little bit more about how you're feeling about that. And then pause, right? Lean back, actually listen to what the other person has to say. When you start doing things like that, it becomes easier each time. It becomes easier to not feel so fragile with my ego when you keep putting it out there. When you keep putting it out there for growth and for feedback,
Yeah, and you
it's
didn't
not.
die. You didn't
Yeah, you
die, no
didn't.
matter what your ego is trying to tell you. Like, don't say this or else. And you go through enough
Right.
or else's, and you're like, all right, well, every or else, I keep getting better. Every or else, I other
Yeah.
people offer me grace that my ego tells me wouldn't
Right.
have been there.
There hasn't been a single piece of quote unquote negative feedback that anyone's ever given me that has detrimentally like hurt me in my life. If anything, those are the things that have helped me in my life. I have to interpret them in a healthy way, obviously, and I have to be selective about who I'm letting uh, through that doorway to allow tough, critical
Right.
candor. Candor has to be attached to love, otherwise, it's just hurt.
Mm,
So I've learned that too, that you can accept candor, but if there's a basis of a trusting, loving rapport or relationship, yes, I can accept candor from somebody who is also being vulnerable, but I will not accept candor, even if it's true, if there's no love attached to
mm.
that.
No, well put. I and reflecting back on some of the things you just shared too, I love the way that you put the difference between like self-awareness, self-interest, and ego, kind of
Hmm.
managing like the forces
Yeah.
around both of those, and the perception that someone could be like, in the way that you framed it, self-aware, but not in a productive way.
Hmm.
That like, oh yeah, it's just how I am. Just have to deal with it. So like they
Yeah.
lack any motivation for self management, or they're disconnected from it. They're
Right.
disembodied because the ego is saying, I am how I am, and anybody who doesn't accept me how I currently is wrong
Hmm.
and out to hurt me.
Correct.
Versus
Right.
the opposite is true. You have to get those feelings still happen in you. Oh, I'm feeling
Hmm.
threat. I'm feeling this, which would make you pause and be like, all right, I am talking too much. I'm going to back out and say, hey, tell me about like that's you're going over the hurdle of ego, but we're keeping that beast in the basement. We're keeping that
Yeah.
down. So I'm like, all right, I have you under control where I can, even though you're there, I'm going to move past it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I guess the riding that, talking about habit, talking about change, talking about like a leadership journey for you,
Hmm.
one place that I know I'd love to hear some stories and some guidance on is around senior care and healthcare, where I hear over and over again when I'm either working with my clients or I'm traveling around, even when I'm reading, innovation, risk taking, change, innovation, innovation. Like, and you're seeing this,
Yeah.
and then I go and look and I don't see any. I see
Hmm.
meetings about it. I see committees talking about it. I see people going to conferences talking about it. But what I
Yeah.
fail often to see is the pull through, the discomfort, the risk that actually goes into we're actually going to launch this. We're going to try this thing. And from listening to you speak and just knowing you a little bit, it seems like you've been able to do that a little bit. You've been able to roll that through and present a different option, particularly in
Hmm.
dementia care. So I'm just curious as to what guidance you would give someone sitting in, healthcare leadership role of influence, like kind of economic decision maker, if you will, or in senior care with, whether it's from a mindset standpoint, James, a structural standpoint, some things that they should do or think about. I'd just love to hear your perspective.
Yeah. Man, innovation is it's that word that everybody, they use it in this industry and probably every other industry. But here's kind of what I've understood about it, and it also, earlier I said I try not to shy away from terms like leadership. I don't let it go to my head. I just accept it as what it is, and then it's a responsibility. So I'm going to bring that same verse back here. um, Innovation is not about us. It's not about the company. It's not about us, the senior living industry. All innovation. So here's the differentiation. Most people in this field believe that innovation equals new process, and
Mm,
then they stop there. Hey, we have a new way of doing this. We have a new dining program. We have a new activities program. We have a new technology. And so, as long as it has the adjective new attached to it, to most people, it feels like innovation. So at least they're trying. But newness, just for novelty's sake, is not innovation. That's the first criteria here. But the second criteria for innovation is that it has to create value. It has to create new value,
mm,
and that value has to be in exchange for the customer and for the company. So if value is only created for one party, that's not innovation. That's just operational efficiency. right? You've made more profit or you've reduced expenses or whatever. Sure, that new process has created an internal value rise for you, but if the other person, the customer on the other side of that, has not also received new value, it's not innovation.
Mm.
So I'll give an example specific to my world of dementia care. Um, Before having an opportunity to co-found and launch Bella Groves, I worked in a lot of dementia care facilities, and they would pilot things like new activities programs or new dementia training, and they would say this is innovation. But what was at the heart of those pilot projects was improving revenue or reducing expenses. It's just one of those two things. Um, all innovation has to start from the customer. So I really like to think about the design thinking process. So the design thinking is a way to framework how to create change, and basically it's an innovation map. So design thinking, there are two steps before you experiment and prototype and roll it out there. The first step is that you have to actually empathize, and that's the part that our industry misses the most. We don't actually empathize and take the perspective of our customers and ask and poll and talk to them and say, hey, what do you think about dementia care offerings right now? What are you frustrated by that our industry, even after you moved your loved one in, you still don't see resolved? So step one is empathy. Before you even go to the drawing board, you got to have a notepad. You got to
But do
ask
you think,
questions.
just hitting
Yeah.
pause there on the empathy front, do you think that it's because we know better, the senior
Yes.
leaders of those organizations? Like, we already know, therefore that's a waste of time or something in that.
100%.
Okay.
Actually, not 100%. I think it's 80%. I think it's 80% that. I think a lot of, especially the incumbent leaders in senior living, believe no, 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 no. We have a great product. We have a superior product to our competition. We just need to tell our story better. That's the thing that our industry says a lot is,
Okay.
oh, nope, they misunderstand us. We need to tell our story better. I think it's 80% that, and it's hubris, and it's, you just aren't willing to see what the customer is telling you. The other 20%, I would say, I think that there are enough decision makers in our industry that are aware that our current value proposition is not meeting current customers, much less future customers. However, they are close enough to the end of their careers that change management is too long.
Uh,
So
yeah.
if you think about, I I have a house in a neighborhood, and there's 10 houses, and 8 houses are from families who are improving their property. They're putting in shrubs, they're cleaning out, they're putting new roofs on, all of that. They're invested in that neighborhood for another 10, 15, 20, 30 years. But if I'm about to sell my house, I'm probably not going to sink $10,000, $20,000 onto a new roof. I'm not really going to fix my foundation unless you need me to. I'm not going to put in a pool. I'm not going to get my money back on that. So you're preserving your investment because you're about to leave that investment. You can't introduce new risk into the profile. So I think because so many of our decision makers are close to cashing out on their investment of senior living, are not willing to put in new risk, and innovation is risky.
Mm.
So it's 80% hubris, and I don't see the customer story, and I think it's 20% I know it, but I'm about to sell my house.
Yeah, and it's like that I'm measuring myself against the next maybe 18 months to 24 months of return, quarter over
Yeah.
quarter over quarter, and it's not going to impact that line of sight. That makes a lot of sense. Whether
and
that's at
and
the board level, if the board pulls a lot of the levers, the age and the demographics of the board and the motivations of the board, all the way down to the senior team level. That
it, and it's at the funding level too, BJ. So so much of our industry is funded. Well, so at Bella Groves, there are 3 families that came together. We put our money together. We got a loan. We put savings on the line, and we self-funded the launch of this independent operations here for our local community. Most senior living alternatives here are funded by private equity, real estate investment trusts. they're funded by people who will never even know that their money is attached to that project.
Mm,
So if the funding source of senior living is detached to the value exchange, all they're counting are basis points, which are percentages of percentages.
mm,
They are certainly not going to have any motivation to go deeper into thinking, hey, you know what? Why don't we improve this? Why don't we actually innovate? If innovation is aimed at profit improvement, you're already lost. You've blown way past empathize. You've blown past the second step, which is to define the problem based on what you just empathized, and then you start to develop and
So
create.
you are a senior leader in this field. You think this way. You know to bury an empathy, but like let's say I'm listening to this, you're
Hmm.
talking to me, and I'm in a situation maybe of influence, but I have to report to the CEO, I have to report to the
Yeah.
board, and they think opposite. Like,
Hmm.
what would your guidance be to me for like, hey, how do I show a group that has that wiring? That's how we know they're going to look at this, like the latter, not the former, if you will. Like they're going to
Hmm.
look at it with that more calcified view rather than this design thinking, start with empathy view. What would be the steps that you would give them to maybe better influence that group of people?
Oh man, this is not gonna feel like a very good answer, but I think it's the honest one. To me, that's like asking the question: I'm in an abusive relationship. What can I do to help the other person not abuse me so often?
Ouch.
So my answer is you got to leave that relationship.
Mm,
And so here's why I know it doesn't feel like a good answer because it sounds impractical, but there's no special pedigree here with me, BJ, other than my mindset. There's no special pedigree of money or family influence or existing, capital. Like, um, we are doing this, this is sweat off the brow type of work. But I am, I am, I'm capable and I'm going to try. So I broke off from those VP roles, the corporate director roles, because at every turn, I always had to answer to somebody who were closer to the funding of the business than they were to the front line of the
mm.
business. And so I was not going to change my abuser. I had to leave the relationship. And so I'm still in the field. I'm still wanting to influence and affect change in senior living, but I'm just not willing to make the trade offs anymore uh, to systems that aren't meant to innovate and find people like me and so many others that want to change this field. So it may feel like an impractical answer, but I promise it's not because I did it.
Well, I think it's. I mean, it bums me out to hear it, but it doesn't surprise me. And I think that there are alternatives in terms of. I mean, if you're in a toxic culture and in a culture where you know the incentives are pushing you in a way that's not going to lead to innovation, tied to empathy and value for your patients, your clients, your
Hmm.
customers.
Right.
Um, there are people that will think that way, but it might be a different setup. But if you're so busy trying to keep afloat and you're also stressed out from being there and you're also overworked for
Hmm.
being there, thinking strategically about your own life becomes a very difficult task for people to do. So they keep grinding, 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 and they forget that
Hmm.
there are a panoply of other options out there. The the one premise that I was just I'm constantly evaluating. I try not to get too locked in. Is I think innovation happens in places like Bella Groves in the way that you sent. I think innovation has to happen free from the fetters
Yeah.
of that you just brought up. And if I'm a person who doesn't have an MBA, a business background, but I work in senior care, I still can have the option of better interviewing
Hmm.
the places that
Hmm.
I'm going to because there aren't none of them. There
Right.
could be
That's
fewer,
right.
they could be harder to find. It's going to take some legwork. But if I line up and I find myself with a James Lee or from somebody else that's trying to innovate in a place that matters to me, um, I might find my spot and I might not have to go collect funding and do all the things that you did, James, to make that happen.
Hmm.
So I think there are probably levels of engagement, although leaving a
Yeah.
job, you might have to leave a community. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not easy. It's not like, hey, here's a trick. Here's what you could do to get leaders to lock in on the new approach. Like, I think it's fair.
I tried for 13 years before, Bella Groves. And by the way, I don't think all, senior level leadership and senior living are, Darth Vaders. I think that there are some amazing people that I've worked with and met that feel trapped as much as anybody else, but they have to, you know, um, they have to keep moving forward. They have to keep kind of, the marching orders are what they are. But for me, I'm grateful that I didn't ever get to that senior executive level where I felt, we talk a lot about golden handcuffs, that you get paid too much to leave a position. But I talk about passion handcuffs, and that there are people
Passion
in this
handcuffs.
industry who are so um, um, just beaten down by the status quo of this industry, that at every turn this industry keeps showing its passionate leaders, at the community, at the regional level. They show them over and over again that profit wins, and that is the sole motivation for everything. And they dress it up in the right conversations. They dress it up with all of the right words, but they've adopted those words. They're not their words. Their words are, um, cap rates and basis points and, return on investment. That is their language. But they're fumbling through. Oh, we care, and compassion and mission. They're fumbling through those words, but that's not actually their language. The language of caregivers, people like me, is care, innovation, change, impact, influence, community. Those are actually our terms. And so our industry, like most, have these, two different terms that are competing with one another. But the reason I talk about Bella Groves, the reason I join podcasts like this, the reason I try to speak up a little bit when it comes to this, even if it doesn't feel safe in I mean, it does here. But after this recording is done and this is playing, I still have to go to conferences with these people who I'm, essentially
How
calling
dare
out,
you, James?
right?
How dare you?
And so, I understand I have to talk about things. The things that are wrong about our industry, I use them as reference points. I'm not anti senior living in the least. I am pro senior living as anybody can be, but I am anti the status quo of the way that we've been doing it. But I'm merely referencing those. I'm not trying to make those businesses fail. We need those businesses to actually be successful.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that I can't change those machines from inside. So I'm going to go into my little corner of San Antonio, Texas, with our team, and we're going to go do this. And so we don't have the advantages of the big guys, but in a lot of ways, we have advantages that they do not. And you better believe we know what they are. We are savvy. We're business savvy, but it is the business savvy is just to serve our mission, and the other companies are the other way around. They have a purpose to get the returns on investment, and they have to have a mission to sell it. We have a mission, and we have to come up with a business plan to sell it. So that's the difference.
But I think I want to close this thought, and I want to go back to the design flow that you were talking about that starts with
Sure.
empathy and moves forward. But I think what you're sharing, why I don't think it is going to be as confrontational as maybe you shared it there, is because why do we do monocrop agriculture? We have like billions of people to feed.
Hmm.
But what's happening in self-sustained farms where they're doing different things right there? That's kind of the innovation hub that down the
Mm.
road might become the new model. Hey, I have a hospital. We have 80,000 employees at the Cleveland Clinic or wherever I'm at. Like there's a
Yeah.
certain volume of production that needs to happen there. So it's already happening. There's already
Hmm.
successful strategies at that scale that starting smaller is the only way to
Yeah.
prove some of the results out that can be installed in a division, in a small city, in a small
Right.
community where we can start the measurement mechanics to start moving and growing things out. Like I think that what you're sharing here is a perfect example of what that might look like in dementia care and senior care,
Hmm.
where it's like there
Yeah.
are things that we can start sprouting up in different places, but you're doing it in a fashion that's going to show the evidence that's going to actually matter to people.
Yeah.
Well, is there going to be profit? Yeah, there is. But can we start over here?
Yeah.
Hey, well, is this scalable? Yeah, actually there is. But can we start over here? Like
Hmm.
you're hitting those minimum criteria where people would typically go, not listening. They don't
Yeah.
understand. You're speaking. You're in their land playing. It's not some
Yeah.
different foreign territory. So I think that there's going to be more open ears for that. And I think
I
people
hope
really
so.
want to be that way. And I think as younger folks come up and succeed in organizations, there's going to be a greater hunger for it
Yeah.
because in this generation coming up, when we talk about generational workforces, I think this generation is like more hungry to lead than maybe they've been tagged the younger generation in the workforce
Hmm.
right now. What they
Yeah.
want is meaningful work and meaningful results to suffer toward,
Hmm.
and they're not
Yeah.
getting a lot of it. So what you think is, oh, I'm getting, they're whining, they want these titles, they want this money, they want to make impact, and they're screaming at you that they're not doing it, and they
Yep.
need to be put in places. So I think there's going to be people filling the holes. But I do want to go back because like
Yeah.
time, I want time to allow. I have that, and I have one more question at least before we cap. So you talked
Yeah.
about the design mindset that you had, because I talked about, well, how do you innovate? And I think this will be important for people to hear. And you talked about empathy as kind of step one. So walk us through the rest of them.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways to think about design thinking. And if you're listening to this recording, you just Google design thinking and you'll get a whole bunch of different results. Just find one that resonates with you and, have at it, dig in. So empathizing, but there are kind of 5 stages of it that traditionally are, those components. So empathizing and then defining the problem based on what you just found out. So you can't go into the hypothesis with the problem that you're defining. You got to talk to your customers. The third middle step is finally develop. Once you've done those first 2 things, now you try to develop and put together what you're offering to the market. So Bella Groves is kind of that stage 3, but we are also doing stage 1 and 2 all the time.
Mm,
And here's the beauty of design thinking. If you Google it and you find a good image, it's not a linear process. At every step in the process, you can go back to the one before or 2 before and then leap forward.
mm,
So that's kind of the beauty of design thinking. Um, and I'm doing this offhand, so I don't remember all of the terms. But stage 4 is then you experiment, you get it out there, right? So you've produced something. Now you're going to prototype and offer that to the market. The point of it, though, is to learn. Did we nail what you just told us? Okay, we got half of it. Great. We're going to keep that. The other half that didn't work. Let me retool that. Go back, empathize, define, and you keep moving it forward. And then at the end of the process, you are institutionalizing the things that work. So you have to embed, those things as part of the business. But then the arrow goes all the way back to the beginning. You got to empathize what hasn't worked. So growth in the company isn't, look, it worked in San Antonio. Now we just multiply. That's what private
mm-hmm,
equity is, right? Oh, this model worked. Now I'm giving you funds to multiply that. It can't work in true innovation. You're staging each part. Okay, this part worked. Now we got to grow onto the level 2. But before we do, we better go back and do our market research, talk to customers, and do that. So I think that if you think about how a company grows that way, BJ, you are really solidifying the foundational things that work. And so for us at Bella Groves, to make this very, very practical, what we're starting with right now, we have multiple levels of how we want to serve our community through dementia education. That is our product, is dementia education. The first delivery of that is in a traditional dementia care facility. So we have a 32-bed dementia care home residence here in Bulverde, which is in North San Antonio. And so what we are trying to prove is that our caregivers that we hire are going to be better caregivers because of the education that we provide to them. So we've written our own training, we train our caregivers, we learn what worked and didn't work, we refine the training, and on and on and on. So the end result is that people like John in that earlier story are having much better, more joyful lives, and so are their loved ones. Great. Proof of concept. Keep adding to that. The next level from there is we're going to take what we learn at the traditional dementia care facility, and now we're going to take that out to the community, to families who are earlier in their caregiving journey. These are people who will not be senior living traditional customers for 5, 6, 7 or more years, but we can help them in the earlier parts. So if you, BJ, are the primary caregiver for dad at home and he's in the early to moderate stages of Alzheimer's, instead of you fumbling through the next 5 years, guess what? There's a credible dementia education company right in your backyard
Mm,
that, for a nominal fee compared to assisted living, can help you to navigate all of the things you need to do. How do I get my dad to the doctor? Hey, he's starting to not take showers. How do I do that? Ooh, he's having a lot of trouble with sleeping, right? And doctors and neurologists, they see you every 6 months. It's not helpful for the day-to-day stuff that you're going to be worried about as a caregiver.
mm,
So that dementia education now has a second way to produce revenue for the company, but it's another way that we're serving the community. And then we've got a third level and a fourth level after that. But each step must go through that empathizing, defining, designing. All of those things have to keep happening before we level up,
yeah. Well, and
if you will.
I love how you share that, and I love the humility in it because it keeps going back to empathy. Is this
Yeah,
impacting the
yeah,
people we're here to serve, or is it advancing a model we want to work because it'll make us money or it'll look good on paper? Like, I think it's authentic, so I think it works. I want
yeah.
to tag one more thing. I know we're just at an hour, but
Hmm.
you talked about passion handcuffs.
Yeah.
So, and that ties to the last question I have, and is one I get often. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about maybe what you realized the difference between an engaged employee
Hmm.
leader workforce versus a disengaged team, which maybe they're firmly locked in the passion handcuffs, they're tied into the mission, but they're burned out. I
Yeah.
guess what have you seen, and I guess what have you done to build a more engaged workforce?
Yeah, it's such a great question to end on. Let me ask you, have you ever grown out of a friendship, like a long term friendship where you're like, it just doesn't serve either of us anymore and we just kind of both have to move on? And, um, at some point you realize this friendship isn't serving me. It's all going one way.
Yes, more than
Um,
once.
yeah, and it in the moment feels like a sad occurrence, but the more time that passes, you realize, okay, that was a good thing for both of us, and we've moved on. I no longer feel like I'm mad at that person because that person was disengaged from this friendship, right? So the reason I'm anchoring to that kind of life experience is that I think specific in senior living, the engine of what makes this industry work in the first place are frontline people who are willing to be the hands-on care, joy, mediators at the community level, at the facility level. The the job of Bella Groves, the way I see it, is very different from what I think senior living traditionally looks at employees. Senior living looks at employees as an expense on their profit and loss sheet that they have to manage. And the people can feel that. The
Mm,
people can feel when they are treated as an expense line item, labor, less overtime, less staffing ratio, less whatever. It's just minimizing, minimizing, minimizing. So we think of it very differently. Um, Caregivers and families need a place to transact. Caregivers want to be caregivers. Families who need help need help. And all a company should be, at least in my opinion, in senior living, is that we provide the platform where they can exchange that value as often and as easy as possible. So we have, I believe, very engaged employees because they see every day that all of our work is spent on, hey, do you have the tools that you need, the resources that you need, the background information on this resident, the technique on how to handle verbal aggression, the training on medication. We have caregivers that we provide so many resources to them. It's like we're behind the scenes and we're like, hey, caregiver, here's a tip sheet on this resident. hey, here's a heads up on family, and so that caregiver is given the platform at Bella Groves to be able to deliver their care as well as they can. That's what they want to do. That's what they're passionate about. So we don't see caregivers as expense line items. We see them as one of our two customers,
Mm,
right? And so, of course, that's going to create engagement. The reason that we leave friendships is that one of them or both are no longer serving the other person. It's just one. And so, in the senior living industry, there are many, 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 many caregivers who are breaking up friendships with senior living because they are no longer willing to stick with the exploitation. And it's a strong word, but I believe it's true that this industry exploits caregivers because they are tied to this job through passion handcuffs. The
mm,
the de facto kind of call your bluff that senior living does is okay. Well, we have the place where you can provide the care. So good luck finding other places to do that.
mm,
Well, unfortunately for us, there are many, many different ways that caregivers can do that. So the gig economy of senior living is already here, and there are companies that are building platforms for that. So caregivers can just pick up shifts at various senior living communities based on whether they like it or not. And I
mm,
think that's great. It has to start moving towards that direction. So disengaged versus engaged employees has very little to do with the culture artifacts, I call them, what of most companies, the culture mission poster, the foosball table, if you will. I think there's a lot of that, but it's just dressing up, looking at labor as an expense to manage versus looking at our caregivers as part of our customer base. They are the resource, they're the natural resource, and we have to help them um, find their final form where they have the most value to the people they want to help in the first place. So, um, again, not a traditional answer, but this whole conversation has been non-traditional, right?
well, and I appreciate your candor, and just kind of entering the danger on some of these. And to cap, if people want to learn more, like they piqued their interest today, and they're like, "Wow, I want to learn more about this part of what James just shared, and I want to learn
Mm-hmm.
more there." Where can folks listening find you?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I think it's the safest, easiest place for me to exchange ideas and thoughts. So LinkedIn is a really great way to do that. Um, the website, my consulting business, Bear Wise Consulting, the animal bearwiseconsulting.com. There's a whole nother conversation we should have about naming of companies. So Bearwise is the name of my consulting efforts. But yeah, those two ways, but primarily LinkedIn is a great place for us to engage.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we'll put
Yeah,
all those tags in the show notes, definitely on YouTube and everywhere else that you'll get this. We'll share this out via social media. And please just don't be shy reaching out to James. He obviously struck me as someone leading, innovating, walking the walk in a field that is growing and needs a lot of great leaders. So I really appreciate, James, the time at the table at the hotel casino that we were
yeah,
speaking at,
same
and I
here.
appreciate you pinning this down now. And I'll be excited to continue the conversation.
It's the start of a friendship, man.
100%. Be
Yeah.
well, James, and thanks everybody for listening.